Greetings, adventurer. Welcome to D20 Academy. I'm your host, Shallow Kaneshiro, and today is episode 15, the class spotlight on the Cleric. Alright, so first off, I want to apologize for posting this so late. I did a lot of things today. I had a lot of work, so I haven't really had a lot of free time. But I did find a good little window here. I'm doing the best I can. So sorry about the episode being so late. Today is another class spotlight on the Cleric. This is the third one we've done. I think at this point I'll just go in alphabetical order of the classes. So, this is a segment of the podcast where I go over all the details on a class, including, what the heck it is, its strengths and weaknesses, race and background synergy, some of its key features, its subclasses, the playstyle it best suits, kind of some of my experience with it, maybe. Just, anything to help new players, better understand this class, and maybe if they are interested in playing it, or even people who have been playing the game for a while, just kind of refresh their memory, tell them something that maybe they didn't know, or remind them why it's such an awesome class and why they should play it next. Also, I probably will not be able to release a third episode this week. Friday, I am swamped. I got a ton of things I got to do. And tomorrow, I also have some things, so if I do have time tomorrow, I'll create Friday's episode, but it may be the case where I can't post a third episode this week, so I apologize for that. Like I mentioned before, I'm getting into a ton of things, so I won't be able to post as frequent as, I once was. Also, I'm probably moving Monster Monday, and maybe even these class spotlights, to bi-weekly, just because definitely for the Monster Mondays, it takes a lot and lots of work and research to get those things done. So even though I love doing them, it's just a big chunk of my time that goes into those. And, I'm not having a ton of time anymore with all the things I'm getting involved in. But I still want to, be uploading as frequently as possible, giving you guys the content that you want. But with all that said, let's just get into this class spotlight on the Cleric. Okay, so I'm just going to start with the description of the Cleric, kind of what it is if you're not fully aware. So, Clerics are powerful spellcasters devoted to a particular deity or pantheon of deities. So they're kind of like priests, I guess. They follow like the tenets of these gods, whatever the god believes and kind of the rules they've set down for their followers. They follow those as they journey throughout the world. They're potent healers, devastating fighters. Also something interesting. Classes like bards, wizards, sorcerers, warlocks, they all use arcane magic, whether that comes from learning it, whether it's innate or from a pact they've made. But clerics are unique spellcasters because they use divine magic, which is different because it's bestowed upon them from their deity. So, just to be sure, there's kind of different kinds of magic in D&D. Maybe I'll talk about it more in a later episode, but the most common is arcane magic, and that's your typical kind of magic that wizards and sorcerers and such cast. But then there's divine magic, which comes from gods or celestials. So it's like paladins, priests, clerics. Those kind of characters are the ones who use divine magic. Then there's psionic magic. That creatures like mind flayers will use, or monks maybe, or prophets will maybe use kind of psionic mind magic. There's a couple other just different kind of kinds of magic. It's not described in lots of detail in the 5th edition stuff, kind of what the differences are and such. And rules-wise and things, it doesn't really matter what kind of magic you're using, but I thought I'd put it out there. Most of the classes, the main 12 classes in D&D 5th edition, use arcane magic, but clerics are cool because they use divine magic, which is just a little different. Okay, so the basic cleric stereotype. The cleric is one of the kind of 4 key classes in the classic D&D party. So I mentioned this before, but the classic D&D party is fighter, rogue, wizard, and cleric. They kind of like cover all the bases. It's really balanced. Just since the beginning, this has just been like the classic D&D party. So clerics are one of those four. They're kind of known as healers. Throughout D&D's history and kind of in the community, clerics are mostly seen as just like healers. So in battle, all they do is just heal their friends who are, getting in the fray and stuff. But thankfully in 5th edition, they are not at all limited to just healing. They're really powerful, they're really versatile, really cool. Because there's so many subclasses, which I'll get into later, you can kind of create a cleric that you want to create. But yes, their strengths are in healing. They're the best healers in the game. And then just in versatility. Not only their spells are quite versatile, but also they can use armor and weapons and things to help better protect themselves, and so they can hold their ground better than other classes like wizards or sorcerers, who rely very, very heavily on magic and are not very good with armor and weapons and that kind of thing. But clerics, they have some pretty solid proficiencies in most armor and weapons. So they're very versatile in spellcasting and in that area as well to hold their own ground. They might be the most powerful class in the game. I'm not really sure. You'll have to do some of your own research on that. But power level-wise, they're definitely one of the most powerful, just because of the spells they have access to, their versatility, the fact that there's a subclass made for optimizing healing, which once it gets to higher levels just becomes stupid. They are a very, very, very powerful class in 5th edition. Maybe Wizards didn't want to make it seem like they were just restricted to healing and things like that, and wanted to make them more enticing. But they're very, quite powerful. Obviously, that just comes down to rules, and if you're, trying to optimize your character. For some players, D&D is not about being the most powerful and stuff, so, it doesn't matter power level-wise for the classes, but Cleric is definitely on the high level of the power spectrum when it comes to looking at the classes. So they have lots of strengths, and their weaknesses kind of only come in like stealthing and kind of rogue things. So because of like their armor and stuff, and like that they can hold shields and weapons, they're probably going to be like really bad at like stealthing and pickpocketing and things like that, like a rogue or a ranger would be better at. And like maybe restricted play and healing, if that's kind of how you build your character, or that's what the party requires you to be. So maybe gameplay can get a little monotonous if you're just always healing. Definitely if you're like not the kind of person who's okay with that. Those are kind of the only weaknesses, but the cleric is pretty powerful, pretty versatile. Also, just a note on the stereotype. Clerics, not only like in pop culture, but just in D&D, they're just stereotypically like followers of like a lawful good god. They're kind, generous, righteous. They do what's right. It's a trope that the cleric is like lawful good. Like the cleric or paladin typically is, lawful good, and they're always keeping the party on track and doing the right thing. But I think it's a really interesting question to go against a stereotype and what if you followed a different kind of god? Because depending on the campaign setting, of course, the god or the pantheon of deities you follow, maybe they're not lawful good or super, inclined towards good. Obviously, depending on the campaign setting, many of the gods might be like more neutral or evil. So what if a cleric followed, one of those kind of gods? How would they play differently, not only in the party makeup and during combat, but just as characters? Because something that defines a cleric, that makes them stand out above all the other classes, kind of the main thing that makes clerics unique is the fact that they follow a god. And they do have some similarities, actually, to paladins. Paladins and clerics are actually quite similar because they like divine magic. They're both healers. They're both, pretty good with like weapons and armor. Obviously, paladins are more soldier, more fit for combat, like weapon combat, and clerics are more fit for spellcasting. But they're pretty similar. And a paladin might also serve a god, but in 5th edition, they don't really follow a god in their subclass or anything. As a character, they can, but instead they just like follow an oath, more of ideals and rules to live by rather than a god. Whereas clerics, follow a specific god in a specific domain, whether it be the knowledge domain, the life domain, whatever that is. But and they're also kind of similar to warlocks because they follow like another being. I'll probably get into like the difference between them in a second here. But just asking that question, what if your cleric followed a different kind of god that's not always like the lawful do the right thing god? And so to illustrate this, I want to talk about Critical Role for a second here. I've talked about this show in past episodes. You might have heard of it. Critical Role is probably the most famous D&D show out there. It's a bunch of nerdy-ass voice actors playing D&D. Really entertaining show. It's really great. You can learn a lot from it as a DM, as a player. It has a great community. It's a great show. But as the recording of this episode, there are 2 campaigns. They finished the first, I believe, in the December of 2017, and they're currently on their second campaign. There are 2 clerics I want to focus on. One from the first campaign and one from the campaign they're running now. So the first campaign, there was a gnome cleric named Pike Trickfoot, and she followed a god named Sarenrae, who is like the god of light, and she was a very, very lawful, good character. She was very kind and generous, and she loved everyone, and she wanted to do the right thing. And she spent her time in temples, helping the poor and things like that. That's more of a stereotypical cleric. Is it a bad thing? Not at all. As like for most of us, as like regular people, that's kind of how we think. We want to help people who are needy, and we want to do the right thing and such. So, it's not that hard to be playing like a lawful good, cleric, or, just like a neutral good cleric or someone like that. Because, that's how most of us are innately. That's how we're raised. But, yeah, so, you can get a lot out of that. Pike is a great character. She's, really cool. Like, not only does she heal in the game, but, like, she has some crazy clutch moments that she's done in battle, from attacking herself and using her weapons and stuff. But, Pike is kind of the stereotypical good, light cleric. But there is a cleric in the second campaign named Jester. And Jester is a tiefling cleric who follows a god named the Traveler. And the Traveler is more neutral on the spectrum. They care more about just kind of causing kind of chaos. Not in an evil, dark way, but like just in a fun trickery way. Like pulling pranks and just bringing like laughter into the world and, lighting up people's days. So that's the one that Jester follows. So she's kind of a prankster. She's very tricksy. Much more like inappropriate and boisterous than Pike is. She doesn't follow like an evil god or anything like that. But she's not. Jester as a character is not, like super lawfully good and kind of the stereotypical like light, give to the poor cleric. Because the god she follows, the tenets are different. The god's just about like, just pull pranks wherever you go and, sow chaos. You know what I mean? Like brighten up someone's day, make yourself laugh, make your friends laugh. Like that's kind of what the god is focused on. That's what she does, and so that's kind of what she believes. And so she's bit off the like the stereotypical cleric. So it's been kind of interesting to look at both of those. Different kinds of clerics, looking at the different kind of gods they follow, how it fits, in the stereotype. There's also another cleric in the second campaign, which I don't need to get into here. He also has a pretty interesting relationship, kind of with his god. Really cool character, but I don't want to get into him right now. Okay, so just wanted to, if you know anything about Critical Role, or maybe if you didn't, just wanted to kind of illustrate, like, playing cleric does not mean you have to be that, like, holy priest, reverend kind of character. Depending on kind of what god you follow, you can be, more neutral or maybe even kind of evil. So, this is a question I get a lot, and I was kind of confused, actually, from the beginning. How do clerics and their gods differ from warlocks and their patrons? So, if you're not familiar, the Warlock class, which I will get into eventually in one of these class spotlights, one of their kind of main unique things is they've made a pact with a patron of sorts who has given them their power. So here's the difference. Clerics follow a god. They follow the god's like rules and tenets and beliefs and ideals. They don't necessarily have a personal relationship with the god, depending on your campaign setting and how like religion and stuff works. But they follow them and that kind of belief system, and they do what that god wants its followers to do on Earth, right? Whereas warlocks have a personal relationship with their patron, and they've made a pact, they've made a deal. There's been an exchange of something, right? They've given something up for this power from this patron. This does not necessarily mean it's evil. They could have done this to a good being. It doesn't necessarily have to be like a demon or anything like that. Though typically warlocks are seen as like darker just because of the fact that they're warlocks. But this pact doesn't have to necessarily be evil or dark or anything. But they've exchanged something, so they have more of a relationship with this patron. They don't necessarily agree with the patron or follow their beliefs. They can very much disagree with them. But nevertheless, they've made this pact, they've made this trade, and so they're connected to this patron, and they have more of a personal relationship. Whereas clerics follow a god and do what the god commands and things like that. Yes, they can also have like a personal relationship with the god, obviously depending on the campaign setting. Also, clerics follow deities, like literal like gods, whereas warlocks make pacts with just powerful beings. So like archdemons or powerful fae, kings and queens, or otherworldly beings, kind of like Cthulhu, or celestial beings like a very powerful angel or something like that. So just because I kind of get this question a lot, and in case we're confused, that's the difference between clerics following their gods and warlocks pacts with their patrons. Okay, so getting into kind of this race background synergy, if you listen to any of the previous class spotlights, it's just kind of where I go over like how to optimize your character if you care about like the numbers and stuff. So for the best races for cleric, they're probably hill dwarf, wood elf, and human. So here's something interesting. So clerics prioritize wisdom as their most important ability. Of the 6 abilities, wisdom is the most important for clerics because they use it for all their spells and some of their abilities. So you want to have highest wisdom if you're playing a cleric. Obviously, this is, you do want to have typically high wisdom as a cleric. If you want to go kind of against the grain, and if the character that you've made is not very wise, kind of foolish, you can have them have lower wisdom for flavor-wise, but they won't be very powerful as clerics, won't be super useful in battle or anything like that. But if you're someone who doesn't care as much, of course that's fine. What's interesting is that most races in 5th edition give a +2 to an ability and then a +1 to another ability. What's interesting is that no particular race gives +2 to wisdom. Wisdom is used in a lot of classes. Cleric, druid, ranger. It's pretty important for all these classes, but no race actually gives a +2 to it, which is just a little interesting thing. Hill dwarves and wood elves both give a +1 to it, and then of course a human gives +1 because a human gets +1 to every ability score. The most typical, also stereotypical clerics in D&D kind of entertainment or just pop culture in general are like kind of these stocky dwarves, who follow this god very righteously, or like a wood elf with a staff and robes, more of like a priest, or kind of a human, maybe in between those kind of two things. So not only are like they stereotypically portrayed like that, they're also, I guess, kind of the best races for a cleric, if you care. There's not really bad races for cleric, because cleric, can be pretty versatile. You can kind of fine-tune it to what you want it to be. Like, if you want to focus more on, being stronger with weapons and, being able to, like, go into combat with swords and shields, choosing a race that gives pluses to, like, strength can be cool. If you want to be more of, like, a charismatic, kind of someone who likes to spread the religion to everyone, maybe choose a race that has, gives bonuses to charisma. So there's not really any like bad race for Cleric. But if you do want to optimize it, you want to choose Hill Dwarf, Wood Elf, or Human just because they give that little bonus to Wisdom. Now I go to like backgrounds. Like I've said before in previous class spotlights, backgrounds don't add much rules-wise and number-wise, so if you're trying to optimize your character, they don't really matter in the long run as much as your race or your class. But looking at stereotypical clerics, the most common background is an acolyte or a sage. So an acolyte is someone who grew up in a temple, grew up in a monastery, someone who has lived the religious life for a long time. So this makes sense for a cleric, someone who's raised in a church, raised in a temple, so they are very familiar with their god, very familiar with religion, and all that kind of thing. And sages are those, kind of learners, whether it be like professors or scribes or, any kind of like someone who's curious and like likes to learn. Typically, someone like older and wizened. That also would make sense for a cleric. A sage cleric who is more interested in like the intellectual side of religion than like an acolyte. An acolyte was probably someone who's raised in faith, so they just they have faith in their god. They have they know a lot about like religion just from growing up, like it's ingrained within like their psyche and their faith. Whereas a sage cleric might be someone who looks at religion more intellectually and like follows this god. Maybe because of like personal reasons, or just because they can see like the benefits of following a god. Kind of if it's healthy or if it gives them power. The unstereotypical versions, the things that go against the stereotype of a cleric, for backgrounds are charlatan and criminal. So a charlatan is someone on the streets who swindles people, tricks people. Like I said, depending on like what god you choose or whatever, you can go against a stereotype. Jester, from Critical Role, who follows that trickery god, could a character like that could have a background as a charlatan. If they follow a god who loves trickery and chaos and pulling pranks, then growing up on, living on the streets, swindling people for money, tricking them, would make a lot of sense. Also, like being a criminal, maybe you grew up as a criminal in that life, but recently you've discovered this god, and you've seen the light, and you've left behind your old criminal ways and anything. But it's your background because you grew up in like that kind of society, but recently you've become you're trying to find out religion, and you've been going to a temple. But obviously these are not very stereotypical clerics, but of course could still make for very interesting stories. You probably can tell this, but I stress that stereotype is it's whatever, like it's a good thing because for new players it's easier for them to get into character. It's easy for them to play characters because they're familiar with the stereotype and they can get to that mindset easy and things. And it can still be and it can be really fulfilling to play like a stereotype like that. That's totally fine. But then also, by all means, go against a stereotype. Like play what you want to. Play someone unique. Kind of a character that isn't seen very often. Kind of discover what that kind of storyline or character arc can be. I just think D&D is such a great game because you can just do whatever you want. Create the character you want. Play the story you want to play. So, I've talked about this before, like stereotype, no stereotype. I think it's really up for you to decide what you want to do. If you feel more comfortable playing off of a stereotype, and maybe if you're like more of a new player, yeah, go for it. It can be super fulfilling. It can be really fun. If you're someone who likes to create more unique things, wants to play through, kind of a storyline they've never played through before, or a character arc they've never experienced before, then go against the grain. Do something new. Do something fresh. So yeah, you've probably heard me stress that like a bunch in all these episodes. But that's why I include like this best background, worst background, best race, worst race kind of thing. Just because, I kind of want to go over like what if you want to like if you're someone who cares about playing like an optimized stereotypical cleric who's going to be powerful in battle and stuff. If you're someone who cares about that, here's what can help you. But if you're someone who wants to explore a new avenue in story and role playing, here are some things that maybe you'd be interested in. Okay, so that's enough of that, and let's just go on to my two spotlights on two different key features of the class. Okay, so the first feature, the first kind of ability I'm going to spotlight is Channel Divinity. Clerics get this at level 2. and it is, well, actually, it's not unique to clerics. Paladins also have a channel divinity. But basically, it's described as like channeling power directly from your deity. Though that's kind of what your spellcasting is based off of. I guess this is more like a direct way. Basically, it's like you have limited uses of channel divinity, and you can use it. You can use these limited uses of channel divinity to either activate an ability based on your subclass, or if you're a cleric, turn undead. So I guess this is more of the feature spotlight for cleric. Turn undead is unique to clerics, and basically it means like you send out like a blast of energy, and then any low-level undead nearby have to make like a wisdom save or something, and then be frightened of you, be turned, so like they run away. When you get to higher levels, you can start affecting more powerful undead, and even like instead of just turning them and frightening them, just straight up destroying them. So this has been around in D&D with clerics for a long, long time. It's kind of a staple in the cleric the cleric class, is this turn undead feature. And I think it's been integrated in like lots of video games and stuff as well. I don't really like it, to be honest. I don't really agree with it. I think it's fine, I guess. It won't come up very often. I mean, obviously it depends on what kind of campaign you're playing. If the whole campaign is focused on a war against, zombies and necromancers, this is going to be very, very useful. But in just kind of more of a regular campaign where you'll come across undead every once in a while, in the cases where you actually remember you have this ability, it can be useful, I guess, sometimes. Just kind of to speed up combat, I guess, just like destroying and getting rid of those lower level undead to speed up combat. I don't know. One of the reasons I don't like it is, one, because it kind of has rare uses, and also just because I think with the 5th edition push for branching out of stereotype, being unique, doing whatever you want, I'm focusing more on role-playing and story. I don't like it because it pushes more for that stereotypical good, righteous cleric. Because, undead, necromancy, it's seen as evil and dark in, pop culture and in most, like, campaigns or worlds. So, like, obviously the good, righteous cleric will send out the burst of light to scare away the undead or to destroy the undead. But I don't know, what if your cleric is a follower of the god of undeath or the god of death? And, maybe zombies or skeletons aren't, like, super evil or anything in your campaign setting. Then having this ability is kind of counterintuitive for them to be scaring away, like, their allies, or I don't know. It just seems a little weird to me. I guess they've kept it in there just because it's such a staple with clerics just over the course of D&D. And I guess it's pretty good. I guess it can be useful, but I don't know. Maybe if they had made it more customizable to which god you're following or kind of which domain you're in. If you follow a god who like is more of that like lawful, good, righteous kind of god, then I guess this would make sense, turning undead. But then also maybe like more like demons or devils would make sense if you're one of the good kind of players, or I don't know. It's whatever, I guess. It doesn't matter too much, I guess, but it's one of the things that I don't really like about the cleric class. Just I don't think it fits very well with this new thing that I love that they're doing in 5th edition with the backgrounds and all the role-playing things that they're pushing for. Focusing more on story and role-playing than like rules and optimizing your character. It just, I don't know, it just fits into like the righteous cleric stereotype. Whatever, you don't have to use the ability, you'll probably forget you have it anyway. But yeah, I guess I would just kind of focus on that. So you can use this channel divinity feature to either do the turn undead or destroy undead thing, or to do something specifically related to your subclass, which I'll get into in a second. The second feature I want to spotlight is Divine Intervention. This is awesome. I love this. So you get this at 10th level. In 5th edition, you can only go up to 20th level. So that means halfway through your campaign, halfway through your character's arc, you're gaining Divine Intervention. I think that's something that's really interesting that should be looked into. Why do you get Divine Intervention halfway through the campaign? Well, here's what I think. If you listen to my campaign progression episode, if you haven't, I would suggest you go listen to it. I think it's really interesting. It talks about, how campaigns progress, like the story, the threat level, the stakes. But if you kind of understand how story works, 10th level, right, that's smack dab in the middle of your character arc, smack dab in the middle of your campaign. So if you have listened to the campaign progression episode, or if you kind of know how you should run a D&D campaign, well, I shouldn't say like should, because I don't want to tell anyone what to do. D&D is a very free, open game. You should be able to do whatever you want. But in like a classic, tried and true campaign progression, during the middle of your campaign, your characters are, they kind of know of this big evil. Maybe they fought the big evil before. They're kind of conscious of what the main plot line is. They should be conscious of what the main plot line is in the campaign. The threat level isn't super high, but their lives are at stake. They're, gaining some powerful spells, some powerful equipment. They're becoming quite well known around the world as heroes and things like that. Divine Intervention, basically it's an ability where you roll a 100-sided dice, well, a D100, which means you roll 2 D10s and they make up a number out of 100. If you do have 100-sided dice, you should use that because that's awesome. Basically, roll 100. When you use Divine Intervention, you ask, like you're like using your action to like ask your god for like a favor, for them to intervene, and you roll the D100, and you have to get a number equal to or lower than your level. So if you're getting this 10th level, right, you have a 10% chance of getting this Divine Intervention thing. And even at the max level, at 20th level, right, there's still, not that high of a chance that you'll get this. And it resets every 7 days, so you can only use this every week in-game, of course. So then, if you do get it, it's up for the DM to interpret what kind of favor the character asked for and how their god intervenes. Depending on the situation, depending on how powerful the DM wants to make this ability. I think it's really cool because it leaves it up to the DM and the player. It doesn't specify it to any god or fit into any stereotype. It depends on, the kind of character the cleric is and what the DM wants to do with it. And I think that's really cool. But it also is a little hard, definitely for like new DMs and stuff, because there's really like no rules or anything attached. It's like really open, a lot like the wish spell. So it can be kind of daunting for DMs, maybe who are not very good at improvising or more new to this kind of thing. But personally, I really like the ability, and I really like that it comes in at 10th level, because this means that your characters are starting to take a turn towards defeating the main bad guy. The stakes are rising. The gods are beginning to take notice of them being heroes and starting to save the world and things like that. They, at 10th level, they've become, champions for their god, because throughout the first 10 levels they've been following their god's ideals and tenets and doing things for their god, and it would make sense now that like at 10th level their god's beginning to notice them and giving them favors and such that they ask for. So I just wanted to focus on Divine Intervention. I think it's a really cool ability, and I think it's also kind of interesting how it comes in at 10th level. I think that was the right choice to make, and it's just all in all a really cool ability. So before we close off this episode, I'm going to real quick go over the 7 different subclasses of Cleric. Yeah, so there are 7 different subclasses for the Cleric in the base player's handbook. For most classes, there are 2 to 3 subclasses, but for Cleric, there's 7, and I think for Wizard there's 6 or so. So because there's so much, I won't get into each one. I'll just give quick, brief description. Basically, for Cleric, you actually get your subclass at 1st level, whereas most classes you get it at 3rd. You get to choose your subclass at 1st level, and you choose a divine domain. They're called divine domains. Basically, in 5th edition, they've split kind of religion and gods into 7 different domains, and depending on who your god is, kind of their belief system and what they do, what they're the god of, and such, they fit into one of these domains. So if you're following this particular god that fits into this domain, that is your domain. So I'll go over them now real quick. There's the knowledge domain, life, light, nature, tempest, trickery, and war. Now more domains are being released and such because if you're thinking of, a pantheon of gods maybe in a D&D campaign setting like the Forgotten Realms, or maybe like the Greek pantheon or the Norse pantheon, you're thinking some gods don't really fit into any of these domains. But anywho, basically, let's say, you're playing in a Norse mythology game, and your character is a cleric of Thor, right? They would probably fit into, like, the Tempest domain, because Thor is the god of thunder and lightning. So that means that their divine domain is Tempest, so they gain that's their subclass. If maybe they're a follower of Loki, it's probably the Trickery domain, right? So that's their subclass. So that's what the divine domains are. I'll go over real quick just kind of the basic abilities and things you get. So if you're in the knowledge domain, if you've chosen that, it's pretty cool. Definitely not the most powerful. Pretty interesting though. You can like become better in like a skill or a tool for 10 minutes. You can read thoughts. It's pretty cool. Not super powerful, but pretty interesting and can be used really cool in like story and role playing. Okay, life domain. That's the second one. It is broken as hell. It's so unbelievably broken. Basically, the life domain maximizes healing to just a stupid level. Definitely when you get to higher levels, like 17th, it becomes so stupidly powerful, it's kind of hilarious. In my current campaign, one of the players played a life cleric for a while because their other character was dead, and they were trying to find the body to resurrect it. So he played a life cleric for a while, and oh my gosh, it is so freakishly powerful. It like maximizes all healing, makes it stupid. Is it broken? Yes, definitely at later levels. But also, you don't need to optimize it. You don't need to, and in the earlier levels, it's not super stupid powerful. It just kind of makes healing better. It just like increases your healing abilities. But yes, at later levels, and definitely if you're an optimized player, the life domain is broken. It's crazy powerful. Okay, under that is the light domain. Basically, in this one, you can like blind attackers with light, making them harder to hit you and your friends, and then do some extra radiant damage. And then in nature domain, you can like talk to and command plants and animals. Sure, kind of utility stuff, I guess. Tempest domain, probably the weakest. You like can push people away and do some thunder damage, I guess. Sure. In the trickery domain, invoke duplicity. I believe you get this at second level. You can use your channel divinity instead of turning undead to invoke duplicity. This is the coolest thing in the world. Basically, you create an illusion of yourself like 60 feet away or so, and you can like make it do different things. It's just an illusion of yourself. Not only is this, pretty useful having an illusion of yourself, so you can use it to trick people and stuff, you can also cast spells as if you were casting it from that location. That's really crazy, because some of the most powerful cleric spells are melee, so you have to be touching your target. If you're more of a squishy cleric, not a lot of, high armor class or high health, just invoke duplicity, send your illusion right up to the enemy while you're still a safe distance away, and cast these crazy spells into their face. Invoke duplicity is really cool. Is it powerful? I may guess, not the most powerful domain, but invoke duplicity is just such a cool ability. And there's also some other like illusion, invisibility stuff in the trickery domain, I think. Okay, and the 7th divine domain is war domain. Basically, you make it so like you never miss, you can attack more, and you're basically just become a paladin. It just makes you better at like the weapon kind of combat, makes it so you can like wade into battle. So, yeah. I don't really like it just because it makes it too similar to a paladin in my opinion. But, like I said, depends on how like you're optimizing it and how you're playing your character. Okay, so those are all the subclasses, and let's just get into kind of what kind of playstyle Cleric fits, some of my personal experience, before we sign off here. Okay, so Cleric can work for people who don't mind, they don't care about really being heroes in battle, and are fine with, like, healing every turn. I did say, Clerics are not, just healers in 5th edition now. They're super versatile, they can do tons of things. Other classes, can do some healing as well. But they are the best healer, and, they can still be seen as just, like, the main healer in the party, and, they're... I hate when, people say, if you're a cleric, you're required to, heal the party. If you're a cleric, do whatever the heck you want. Go up and hit that monster with your mace, or cast that crazy spell. But... Clerics are very powerful at healing, and so, if you're a cleric, you may want to do that every once in a while. But, so if you're someone who doesn't really care about being a hero in battle, you're fine with healing every turn, like it makes you feel like you're, doing your part and stuff, yeah, playing a cleric can be totally fine. Ashley Johnson, who played Pike Trickfoot in the first campaign in Critical Role, she was one of those players who didn't really care about being optimized, didn't really care about, like, being powerful and everything. So she was fine, like, healing players and, being kind of that stereotypical cleric in battle. And it was, useful, and it was, really cool, and it was fine. Just because she's not the kind of person who, really cares about that kind of thing. Also, like, players who like starting, like, with a relationship with a deity, players who like having that, like, already set, like, ideals and tenets that they're following this god, and, like, the god and this belief system that they're already following, so they can easily slip into, like, the mindset of this character and things. Players who also like that idea, that concept, also a good reason to play a cleric. But being a cleric might not be good for players who enjoy, going right into battle, feeling epic in battle. But based on your subclass and other things you choose, clerics can be that. Clerics can be the ones who go into battle, take hits, swing their weapons, be dealing crazy blows, depending, if you pick, like, War Domain or something, optimize your character. Clerics are just very versatile. They don't really have a lot of weaknesses. So, like, depending on your playstyle, I think, like, most people can get fun out of playing a cleric. They're quite customizable, like, with the Divine Domain and such, and the way you play them and build them. So I think most players can, have a fulfilling time out of playing the cleric. So, just real quick, if you heard the episode, it was one of my earliest episodes I did with my friend Gabe. So he's starting a new campaign this summer, and so I'm playing in that, and I chose to play as a cleric. So I'm telling you right now, like, I've not played as the character yet, so I have never played as a cleric yet. So I can't tell you any, like, personal experience as playing a cleric, but I can tell you, like, why. So I'm someone who doesn't care very much about the numbers, optimizing their character, making them the most powerful they can be. I care very much just more about story, character, role-playing, things like that. So I've had lots of different ideas of characters I want to build. Sometimes, they'll just pop into my head. So, I've written down kind of just these different kind of characters I want to build one day, the different stories I want to explore. And one of these was kind of like a good-hearted, kind of cleric, kind of this good-hearted guy who, is trying to protect, the oppressed, and deals with not being able to protect some of his loved ones in the past. And just the cleric just fit into that. Just of all the classes, the cleric just fit best into that character, kind of that story, that arc. So that's why I chose a cleric. Not because I particularly want to play a cleric or anything like that. It's just the thing that first and foremost is, like, the character and stuff. So anything I can do to go that adds to that, the race, the class, any feats I take, that's what I'm going to do. So the cleric just fit the character the best out of all the classes. So that's why he's a cleric. So if you're kind of one of those players who are like me, who, just cares more about just, like, the characters, the story, just chooses everything based around the story they want to tell with their character, that's really cool. Obviously, that's the kind of person I am. That's why I chose a cleric. I'll let you know in the future, now that after I start playing a couple sessions in this campaign as a cleric, what's it like playing as a cleric. I'm not a player a lot. I'm much more of a DM. So I might also tell you guys, like, my experience about being a player. But anywho, yeah, that's kind of why I chose a cleric for my character. I'm pretty excited, and it kind of fit perfectly because going in alphabetical order, the class spotlight I was focusing on this week was cleric, and I just made a cleric character. So that was kind of cool. So, I learned a lot about my character doing research for this episode and such. And I'm pretty excited to play a cleric. I think they're really cool. But yeah. Alright guys, that brings us to the end of today's episode. Sorry again for such the late upload, and I apologize if I'm not able to upload a third episode this week. But I hope you enjoyed this one. I hope you learned something. I answered some of your questions. Thank you so much for listening, and have a great day.